Hello everyone, welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. Today is Monday, so we're going to be going over the top 5 performers at each position. We'll be talking about some other notable performances as well. After that, in between each one, I'll talk about whether I think these guys can keep it up throughout the year, or if I think it's kind of just a fluky performance. But without further ado, we'll get into it. So we'll start off with the quarterback position. We'll start off with Tom Brady. He's number 1 in the week. This is 6-point per passing scoring format. So if your league uses a little bit different format, just adjust accordingly. Tom Brady was 20 out of 39 for 341 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 2 rushing yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. 37.84 fantasy points. Brady's been pretty good this year. He's kind of been hit or miss in some games, but overall he should be a guy that you can use as a quarterback one more weeks than not. Next up was Big Ben Roethlisberger, and he was 27 out of 46. That should be 333 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 37.32 fantasy points. Then we had Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray was 22 out of 32, 245 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 61 yards rushing, and 2 rushing touchdowns, 31.9 fantasy points. Then we had Josh Allen, who had quite the interesting day. 32 out of 49, 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 38 rushing yards, and a receiving touchdown. And he had 31.36 fantasy points. Josh Allen and Kyler Murray are both guys that you're pretty much going to start week in and week out at this point. Roethlisberger's a guy you can play in good matchups. And matchups that aren't quite as good, you might want to pivot from him, but you can roll him out more weeks than not. And then last but not least, we got Aaron Rodgers, 24 out of 34, 325 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 4 yards rushing, and 1 rushing touchdown, 29.4 fantasy points. So once again, he finishes as top 5 quarterback. He's been up there quite a bit this year. He's a guy you can roll out pretty much every week at this point. A couple other notable performances were Matthew Stafford, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions against the Washington football team. And then on the opposite side of that game, Alex Smith was able to throw for 390 yards. Didn't end up with any touchdowns, though, so kind of limited his fantasy day in that regards, at least. Then we'll move over to the running back position. Once again, Alvin Kamara is in the top 5, and this week he comes out on top. Only 15 yards rushing, but 2 rushing touchdowns, 7 receptions for 83 yards and 1 receiving touchdown, 34.8 fantasy points overall. Once again, this is going to be PR scoring format. If you guys use half point or standard format, just adjust accordingly. But once again, Alvin Kamara is arguably the best running back in fantasy football right now at this point in time. So he's going to be a guy that you're going to roll out every single week anyways. Then we had Josh Jacobs, 112 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 4 receptions for 24 yards, 29.6 fantasy points. Very good day for him overall. The Raiders were pretty much able to run the ball at will against Denver in this one, and he's a guy that you're going to start pretty much every week. Then we got Nyheim Hines, 70 yards rushing, 1 rushing touchdown, 5 receptions for 45 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. 28.5 fantasy points overall. Very good day for him. Back-to-back good weeks for him. Could there be something brewing up in the Colts? He's definitely a guy you could consider for a flex spot in PPR leagues. DeAndre Swift, he had 81 yards rushing, 5 receptions, 68 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. 25.9 fantasy points overall. He's a guy that's starting to take over in this Lions backfield. He's a guy you can trust more weeks than not. And especially if you're playing in PPR or scoring formats, he's definitely a guy that's going to be a solid running back too at this point in time. Ronald Jones had a nice bounce back game. 192 yards rushing, 1 touchdown. One of them was a long 98-yard rushing touchdown. 1 reception for 6 yards, 24.8 fantasy points overall. Should be a guy that you can count on, probably is like a low-end running back too, with upside for more. Some other notable performances that we had this week. A lot of guys that would score 2 touchdowns. Rex Burkhead had 2 receiving touchdowns. Antonio Gibson had 2 rushing touchdowns. Devontae Booker, who paired up with Josh Jacobs, also had 2 rushing touchdowns. Malcolm Brown had 2 rushing touchdowns. Wayne Gallman had 2 rushing touchdowns. Nick Chubb came back, ran for over 100 yards and a touchdown. Could have had 2 if he didn't step out of bounds on his last run. And then Damian Harris over 100 yards once again. So a lot of these guys are guys to consider moving forward. Gallman should have some staying power with Devonta Freeman on IR now. Gibson should be in play for sure. Malcolm Brown will have hit or weak misses. Rex Burkhead's the same way. Booker's been seeing more touches, but a lot of his work did come in garbage time. Harris had 55% of the snaps, so he's definitely worth a shot right now, especially in standard leagues. Then for wide receivers, it was quite the interesting week. We had Cole Beasley come out on top. 13 targets, 11 receptions, 109 yards, and 1 touchdown at 27.9 fantasy points. Keelan Cole has 7 targets, 5 receptions, 47 yards, 1 touchdown. He also did return a punt for a touchdown, so that helped him out quite a bit overall in fantasy. 27.7 fantasy points overall. DeAndre Hopkins, 12 targets, 7 receptions, 127 yards, and a game-winning touchdown. 25.7 fantasy points. Then we had Stephon Diggs, the opposite end of that game. 11 targets, 10 receptions, 93 yards, 1 touchdown, 25.3 fantasy points. And then we had MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. 6 targets, 4 receptions, 149 yards, 1 touchdown, 24.9 fantasy points overall. A couple other notable performances. Pretty much the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers as a whole. Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool. Johnson and Claypool were probably the biggest ones. Johnson was over 100 yards in a touchdown. Claypool had 2 touchdowns. Willie Snead had 2 touchdowns. Then T. Higgins went over 100 yards and had a touchdown. And Michael Pittman, last but not least, went over 100 yards and had 21 yards rushing. Like I said, this was a weird week at wide receiver. Cole Beasley is probably going to be hit or miss most of the year. You can use him in PPR formats, though. John Brown is injured, but they go on bye this week. Keelan Cole is going to be hit or miss. If Laviska Shenault misses more time, he could have some value. DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, you're pretty much starting every week. MVS is going to be hit or miss on any given week. Allen Lazard should be back next week as well. Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers should be pretty solid throughout the year. You might have some hit or misses in there as well. Willie Snead is a guy that you don't want to rely on. T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr. should be consistent moving forward. Then once again, this was an awful week for tight ends. This might have been the worst week for tight ends so far this season. Mark Andrews had 9 targets, 7 catches, 61 yards, 13.1 fantasy points. Rob Gronkowski had 3 targets, 2 receptions, 51 yards, 1 touchdown. He also had 13.1 points. Then we had Hunter Henry come in third, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 30 yards, 1 touchdown, and 13 points. Cameron Brate, of all people, was fourth. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 31 yards, 1 touchdown. And he had 12.1 fantasy points. Then last but not least, we had Jordan Reed, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 62 yards, 11.2 fantasy points. And the only other notable performance was Logan Thomas. He had 66 yards, and that was the most of any tight end this week. So no tight end so far this week has had more than 66 yards. I know the Bears and the Vikings are going to be playing tonight, but it's unlikely that Kyle Rudolph or Jimmy Graham will go over 66 yards either. So just to see no tight end have more than 66 yards in a week is crazy. So hopefully the tight ends get better this year, but it's not been a good year for tight ends, so pretty much unless you have Travis Kelce. But with that being said, this is our top 5 performers from week 10. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed this video. If you guys think I missed anyone, please leave a comment. If you guys have any more thoughts about the top performers for this week, just let me know down in the comments as well. Who you think is going to be able to repeat, who you think is going to be on this list next week as well. But with that being said, if you guys liked and enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It helps build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, and that's one for you guys, the viewers. If you are new or current subscribers yet to do so, also hit that notification bell to let you know every single time that I post up a video. And I post up a video Monday through Friday, essentially. Sometimes we'll throw up another random one on the weekend, but overall our structure is as such. Monday is the top performers, Tuesday is waiver wire day, Wednesday is the Thursday night football preview, starts and sits for that game. Thursday is DFS value picks, and then Friday I go over all the remaining matchups doing starts and sits for them. Also be sure to check out my articles on the Podcastic Network. Last night I put up a new Dynasty article, so it's talking about people to check on their value in Dynasty pretty much. Guys that I think should have some future value and definitely have opportunity going forward. But if you're interested in that, like I said, just check the link down below. Be sure to check out the 2 Point Podcast as well. We're going to be having our Week 10 recap episode go up probably tomorrow. We recorded it today though, but just got to do some more editing on that. If you guys need to reach out to me for any reason at all, please feel free to comment down below. Or you can email me at CoachCraigSports@gmail.com, on Twitter at CoachCraigSport, or on the Coach Craig Sports Facebook page. I'd love to hear some questions for you guys. Love to help you out as much as I can in fantasy. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed, and have a great rest of your Monday.